VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And welcome to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Ladies and gentlemen, so much is happening in the world so quickly. Today we're going to take a look, matter of fact, we're going to be taking a survey approach and look at a number of developments happening in the area of world affairs and our own national security. We'll take a look at what's happening with North and South Korea. We'll take a look at Israel and the breaking news that came from the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday as it relates to Iran and the so-called Iran deal. We'll also take a look at Syria and even the aspect of the threat of Sharia in our own nation. And pulling all of this together, we welcome back to Crosstalk Frank Gaffney. Frank is a national security expert. He is founder, president, and CEO of the Center for Security Policy and speaker on the Secure Freedom Minute. Frank, welcome here to Crosstalk.
Operator. 397.
Are you there, Frank? Hello? Okay, I guess we don't have him here. So we were going to try and reconnect with Frank Gaffney here today. As you know, yesterday Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made some startling information available as it relates to a covert operation of pulling information from Iran. And certainly we saw the implications of that come forth, indicating that Iran has lied not only to the United States, but has lied to the world as it relates to these very matters. And I think we've reconnected here with Frank. Frank, do we have you?
You had me before, but apparently you couldn't tell. Anyway, yes, I'm here. Yes, sir.
Very good. Well, Frank, much of what we talk about today is greatly connected to our Secretary of State, the new one, Mike Pompeo, just confirmed less than a week ago. And before we get looking into what's happening in a number of world situations, if you would give us your assessment of the new Secretary of State. Is he the right man for such a time as this?
I think he is. I've known him not terribly well, but well enough to have taken his measure over the past, probably 6 or 7 years. And he's struck me throughout that time as a serious, national security-minded guy. It's what you'd expect from a guy who graduated first in his class from West Point. He has been intimately involved with the issues that I think are so important, and we'll be talking about them, I'm sure, in the course of our time together.
Yes.
Both from the perspective of a man who served, again, in the United States Army, but also as a member of the House of Representatives, and in particular as a member of its Intelligence Committee. So he really brings a great deal of knowledge to the position, especially since he spent the first year of the Trump administration serving as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. I can't really think of a guy with better creds than Mike Pompeo at a time such as this, and I couldn't be more grateful that the president has picked him and he's now in place.
Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave what some would think is the shot heard around the world as it relates to Iran's secret nuclear deal. Tell us, unfold for us, what did the Prime Minister reveal yesterday, and why is it so significant?
Well, the first thing that he revealed, which is stunning, is that the Israelis found and extracted from Iran half a ton of highly secret documents and videos and photographs and blueprints and other materials right from under the noses of the mullahs, which is an unbelievable, testament to the skill and the courage of the Israelis. It kind of harkens back to those of us who remember Entebbe, the raid that they achieved to liberate practically without loss of life dozens of hostages taken in Ethiopia, as I recall. This is an extraordinary thing in its own right, but as important, of course, is what was in the materials, and there's a lot of poo-pooing of it being heard by apologists for the regime and those who are admirers of the joint so-called comprehensive plan of action. But the reality is, it documented, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, that the Iranians have been lying. And anybody who tells you, well, they were lying then, but they're not lying now, or they were cheating then because they were beavering away at a nuclear weapons program that they lied about, but they're not doing it now, is a fool. And they are deceiving themselves, and they're deceiving us if we listen to them. So I think this was an amazing accomplishment, and again, I'm hopeful that this will set the stage for President Trump to take the step that has, I think, long been his intent and is very much needed, which is to stop pretending that we are protected against this Iranian threat.
And we'll talk about what was unveiled here, but do we know how Israel came in possession of this? How did they go about doing it?
If anybody knows, I'm not among them. I have the feeling that they were able, using the quite impressive intelligence services of the State of Israel, to find it and either bought off or somehow neutralize the people who were in charge of securing it. And how they got all of it out of Iran is a fascinating question, and I'm sure we'll be hearing tales of it in the years ahead. But I don't know the answer right now, other than to say it seems like an impressive feat.
Yeah, and when they talk about what he obtained, I mean, very extensive, 55,000 pages of documents, 55,000 files, 183 CDs. The Prime Minister said 100,000 secret files prove that they lied. I mean, he talked about incriminating documents, charts, presentations, blueprints, photos, videos, and more. It doesn't sound to me like he was overplaying what they uncovered here.
Well, again, to hear the critics say it, he didn't tell us anything we didn't know before, or it's all irrelevant to what's really important now, which is that we've got this great deal and, it's working. Well, I'm sorry. The people who were busily concealing from us a secret nuclear weapons program are, you can take this to the bank, doing it now too. And when the people who, again, are promoting this really, I think, fraudulent Obama bomb deal is the way I think of it with Iran, tell you that, we've got this airtight inspection process underway, and we know that they're not doing anything contrary to the terms of this deal today. You just have to ask them this one question. What are they doing in the secret underground military facilities we're not allowed to inspect? I'm pretty sure it's nuclear weapons programs, I got to tell you.
What timeline is President Trump under to decide what we're going to do with this so-called Iran nuclear deal?
Well, he has set the 12th of May as the deadline for deciding whether we're going to continue to waive sanctions that are still in place. They're not in effect at the moment, but still in place. And then I'm told that there's another 6 months in which there's going to be thrashing around about how that is going to be, accommodated by our European allies particularly. They, of course, have a different view of all of this because they're anxious to do business with the Iranians. And then there's Russia and China, of course, and they have a different view of it because they think the Iranians are their clients. So we're not going to get a whole lot of love from these guys, I don't think. But I believe what President Trump is going to say to particularly the Europeans is, you can do business with us or you can do business with the mullahs. Wow. Which do you want? And I think they're going to come down on the right side of that.
Well, Germany just a week ago, one of our allies, I mean, their Chancellor, Angela Merkel, just last week said they were backing the nuclear deal. Do you think what was revealed yesterday, her mind is going to be changed in light of the new information?
I sure hope so. If not, she would fall into the category of fool that I was talking about a moment ago. Yeah. Fooling herself, fooling her people, fooling others who are ostensibly, well advised to take Germany's chancellor as a guide. But I think that would be a serious mistake. And again, it's predictable in the sense that that's what they do. the Europeans. They're going to the highest bidder in this case, and for the moment, that certainly seems to be Iran. There's a lot of money that supposedly was going to be used for buying up their stuff. It turns out, by the way, that the economy of Iran is tanking because all of that new money, that $150 billion that Barack Obama insanely turned over to the Iranians, seems to have gone off to Swiss bank accounts or otherwise disappeared. It's not benefiting the people as it was promised. It's not helping prop up that economy, which was expected. It's not normalizing the place and turning it into, a good member of the international community. It's gone. And some of it, let's face it, is in the hands of terrorists, and it's in the hands of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is threatening war with Israel and so on. But it's not helping the people, and that means that this is a moment, I believe, to squeeze them economically. And if so, we may be able to help the Iranian people bring down this regime, which is truthfully the only hope we have of avoiding what is otherwise coming, which is an Iranian nuclear weapon that will be aimed at us.
The foreign minister of Iran said his country is not going to accept alterations to this 2015 deal that was brokered. He warned President Trump that the agreement is all or nothing. Frank, if you were advising President Trump today, your response to that issue?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I would say take the nothing. Mm-hmm. Look, the idea that we're going to continue to enable and legitimate and otherwise encourage people to prop up one of the most dangerous and, frankly, despicable regimes on the planet is folly. That would be, I believe, a mistake in the immediate sense. And you talk about North Korea, another set of issues that much in the news at the moment. That's not the signal you want to be sending to Kim Jong-un either, it seems to me, that no matter how badly they behave, no matter how dangerous a threat they pose, we're going to continue to be bound by a bad deal. Mm-hmm. I don't think so. And I don't think Donald Trump does either.
Yeah, and before we get to the Koreas, I'd like to hit you on another matter here in the Middle East, and that is with Syria. Actually enemy rockets hit some Syrian bases over the weekend, causing blasts so huge they registered 2.6 magnitude as far as an earthquake. What do we know is happening, unfolding here in Syria?
Well, I think they weren't enemy missiles in the sense of us. They were our allies, Israel's missiles, I'm pretty sure. Mm-hmm. And what was being done was they were taking out weapons that the Iranians were bringing into Syria for the purposes of threatening Israel. And again, it's a very important message to be sending to the Iranian regime, which, it's important for us to understand, is not loved by its people. And I think anything we can do to squeeze them will help.
We're going to take a quick 60-second break. Frank Gaffney is with us here today from the Center for Security Policy, their website, centerforsecuritypolicy.org. We're going to come back to finish up a little bit more on Syria. Then we're going to head over to North and South Korea and matters unfolding there. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation researcher with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what can you tell me about Neanderthal man?
Chris, from a biblical perspective, Neanderthal man was a human just like me or you. They evidently were an ethnic group that migrated away from Babel, living in very harsh conditions, but were human nonetheless. Archaeological discoveries have shown that they used agriculture, they buried their dead, they had art, musical instruments, they were humans just like me and you. Those who assigned them to subhuman categories suggested that they didn't have the right kind of hands to use tools. But a recent study has shown that they had thumb and forefingers just like ours with just as much dexterity. In every sense, they were as human as you and me, descendants of Noah, souls for whom Christ died. Going back to Genesis makes all the data fit so well.
To learn more about creation, get our free DVD called That's a Fact. Call us at 800-628-7640 and mention the promo code FACT.
Frank Gaffney is with us here today on Crosstalk from the Center for Security Policy. And just before we get back to Syria, Frank, if you would, just give us a word about the organization, the Center for Security Policy.
Well, it's an organization that is now in its 30th year of operations, to my astonishment, frankly. I started it shortly after leaving the Reagan administration, where I had the privilege of serving President Reagan acting as an assistant secretary of defense, and felt that at that time there was a need for an outfit like ours that isn't so much a think tank, really. We do a lot of thinking, of course, and a lot of interesting research at securefreedom.org if people want to check it out. But to really serve as a vehicle for helping promote what my old boss, President Reagan, used to call peace through strength, interestingly enough. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump uses that turn of phrase, too, and to help people in government who are working to do that succeed. So that's our job, and I'm proud of what we've been able to do over the past 30 years, and very happy to be able to talk to you a little bit about how it applies today.
SecureFreedom.org. Frank, we're talking about Syria here, and if you had to just encapsulate President Trump's Syria strategy, define that for us, and whether you agree with it or disagree with it.
To be honest with you, I'm not sure he has a strategy, and I don't so much criticize him because I don't have one either. I'm not sure there is a good strategy for the United States at this point, other than arguably to try to prevent the people who have been doing the most damage in Syria from being able to translate that into an even bigger problem for the region, notably, but not exclusively, our friends in Israel, but also for our interests there, and more broadly, to become very much more serious threats down the road. And I'm thinking there of the Iranians, who are working now to essentially carve up Syria and take as much of it as they can to create kind of what's called a land bridge to Lebanon and to the Mediterranean, from which they also hope to be able to project power. You've got the Russians, who have moved in force and are now trying to build out their position and role in Syria, but also more broadly in the region. And, of course, you've got old Bashar Assad with his chemical weapons and other capabilities, who's going to survive this, it now seems, and therefore be more of a threat. But also Turkey, a country that we've long thought of. It is formally a NATO ally. For many years, it was a very important part of NATO. But it is an ally no more. And we have a book of that title, as a matter of fact, that we've just published, and it's available for free if your listeners would be interested in checking it out at securefreedom.org. But it's looking to have a piece of Syria as well. Indeed, it wants to create a new Ottoman Empire in the region and beyond, perhaps. So these are the forces that are at work, and I think to the extent that President Trump has a strategy, I think it's to just try to check the ambitions of all of those bad actors, and it's not easily done. It's going to be messy, I'm afraid, there for quite some time to come.
From the Middle East, let's head over to North and South Korea. And actually, there have been some pretty amazing developments, at least on the surface, over this past week. As you know, many are shaking their heads in disbelief. Give us your assessment of what's happening with North Korea, South Korea, and this newfound friendship between North and South Korea.
If you'd indulge me, let me just add one last thing to the last answer. I
sure.
think that going back to what we talked earlier about, if Iran is no longer in the hands of our enemies, it will make a strategy and a successful outcome in Syria vastly more promising. So that should be, it seems to me, part of a strategy for Syria, is to think about it as a bigger problem, starting with Iran. As to North Korea and South Korea, look, you have two folks who have one mind. The president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in. You have the president of North Korea, the dictator, the despot, however you want to call him, the ruling tyrant, Kim Jong-un. And these guys have one mind between them, and that is to see what can be done to perpetuate the North Korean regime and unify the peninsula with it remaining a powerful force, threatening others, including us. And it sounds unbelievable, but that's where this South Korean president is coming from. He's been very much on the left. The people around him, his senior subordinates, are people who have been advocates for North Korea for years in South Korea. I mean, literally activists on the North Koreans' behalf. So it's really not so stunning that they've gotten together or that they're hugging each other and dancing together and all that. This is pretty much par for the course, and it has been tried before. There's something called the Sunshine Policy that previous similarly minded leftist South Korean governments have pursued, and the only effect of that has been, to this point at least, to prop up the North Korean regime, to get them money, to get them technology, to get them food, to get them fuel, to get them political legitimacy. And the North Koreans have turned that into more of a threat to both South Korea and the Japanese and for that matter us. So the big question is, what role does Donald Trump play in changing the trajectory of this sort of Sunshine Policy 2.0? And I'm hoping he's going to turn it all around. I mean, he's making it absolutely clear he's not going there, and he's certainly not going to stay there unless the summit is about the elimination of that North Korean nuclear arsenal, and more generally, I think its transformation from a threat to a non-threat. And we'll see. I think that's a long shot, as they say. But that, I think, is the president's approach, and it seems to me about right.
I don't know if you know the name of Trevor Loudon of New Zealand.
Know him well.
Okay, well, here's what Trevor said, and I'd like to get your comment. He said the North does not want to really cease hostilities with the South. They want a unified Korea under one rule. That's what we were talking about. But they say under one rule, and that rule is in the end, is China. He said it makes no sense that North Korea already has functional nuclear weapons, and then they suddenly say that they will stop with those. What's your thoughts on that? As far as he brings in the China aspect to this as well.
Well, Trevor is one of the smartest guys I know on so many of these issues, and he's really gone to school on what people like the Chinese are up to, and more generally communists and leftists and social democrats and for that matter, Muslim brothers, to subvert us and otherwise extend their dominion. And I think he's absolutely right. There would be, let's be clear, there would be no North Korean regime were it not for the Chinese. And given what I've said about the South Koreans helping, that's all well and good. But the thing that absolutely makes it possible for a Kim Jong-un, and before that his father, and before that his grandfather, to operate, to hold on to power, and to build more of it so that he can threaten us, is China. And let me just give you one example because it's so egregious. You may recall recently there were photographs of these seemingly longer and longer range ballistic missiles being paraded through the streets of Pyongyang, the North Korean capital. Well, they happen to be on something called transporter erector launchers, these big trucks that allow those missiles to be erected and then launched from these mobile platforms. Those trucks carrying those missiles, which increasingly are now threatening us, are made in China and are provided by the Chinese to the North Koreans. Again, that's not friendly. That's not helpful. That is proof positive, as far as I'm concerned. The Chinese are playing for the other team.
Yeah. The North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, he made this promise but he's saying, we'll give up our nuclear weapons here, but we need this promise from the United States. We need a pledge saying that the U.S. must commit to a formal end to the Korean War and pledge not to attack North Korea. Your thoughts on that?
Well, if that's all it is, that's a relatively small price to pay.
But the question is that really all there is?
Well, there's two things. The first is, are they really going to denuclearize? And then the second question is that really all they expect to get for it? My bet is, A, they don't have any more intention of denuclearizing than their Iranian allies did, as we were talking about previously.
Right.
And more to the point, I think they're confident that the West will do what it has always done before, which is in the face of their intransigence or their double dealing or, the sort of separation between allies that they specialize in to sort of try to get the South Koreans to, come over to their side and argue on their behalf and so on, that they'll get a better deal than that once they get into the clinches with a Donald Trump. I don't know that that's right, but I sure do appreciate that Donald Trump is signaling he has no intention of doing that. So we'll see. Nobody would be happier than me to be wrong that, North Korea has decided to have the lion lie down with the lamb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just don't believe it, I got to tell you.
And also, I mean, we have this big, kumbaya moment with all these nations and news media and so forth. And we can't forget at the same time, Frank, all the human rights abuses going on in North Korea, the persecution of Christians in North Korea. They are the leading nation in the world for the persecution of Christians.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because that's the thing that I do find dispiriting about all this. Is we are watching now in the person of the president of South Korea, and shortly, quite possibly, the president of the United States, legitimating one of the most horrific, megalomaniacal thugs in human history. This is a man, just to give you a point of calibration, and it's just one, who murdered his own uncle using an anti-aircraft weapon. You know what an anti-aircraft weapon would do to a human being? I mean, it vaporizes them. Well, that's the kind of guy he is to his own family, to say nothing of to his own people, whom he enslaves and brutalizes. And unfortunately, it's not just the Christians. They're in a particularly bad spot because they think there's actually a God other than Kim Jong-un. But everybody else is treated pretty badly in North Korea, too, except for, the party cadre and a few select others. But the point is, and you're so right, and I appreciate particularly you mentioning the Christians, because one of the things that I've been proud to be involved with is a group called Save the Persecuted Christians, and I'd love to talk a little more about that if we have a chance.
Yeah, let's do that right on the other side of the break. This is Crosstalk on VCY America. We're talking about world affairs and national security. Frank Gaffney is our guest today on Crosstalk. A couple websites, securefreedom.org and centerforsecuritypolicy.org. We'll be back in just 1 minute. Again, you're listening to Crosstalk.
Attacks continue against the Bible. Some accuse the Bible of not being historically accurate. Some insist it's a book written by man filled with error. But did you know that archaeology continues to confirm what's written in Scripture? In the fully illustrated hardcover book, Evidence for the Bible, you are introduced to the world of biblical archaeology. Using full-color pictures and an easily read format, you will see that what has been dug up from the earth confirms the places and events from Scripture. Rulers and kings are documented, battles and their outcomes are confirmed, and details of prophetic utterances are precisely what are known to have happened. This book takes you on a fascinating journey during which the traveler never knows what may turn up with the next trial. It's hard to put this book down as one captivating page leads to another. Evidence for the Bible is available for a donation of $30. Call VCY America at 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Frank Gaffney is our guest today, a national security expert, founder, president, and CEO of Center for Security Policy. And we're talking about world affairs and national security today. And friends, again, what we observe in North Korea, I mean, it has the accolades of media and dignitaries from around the world. But let me just say this, that the area of Christian persecution is happening as we speak. And Frank, just as we're going to the break, you had indicated that this is an issue very near to your heart as well.
It is, and it should be really to all of us, but most especially to Christians who have been called, lest we forget, by Jesus to succor their, co-religionists. And too many of us are forgetting that calling. I have a friend who says, what are you going to say on Judgment Day?
Yeah. When
you're asked about it, if you haven't remembered that calling. But to this point, you mentioned, by reference at least, a finding that a group we've been working with called Open Doors, a terrific group that has rated North Korea as the worst in the world when it comes to persecuting Christians. They've also come to a no less chilling finding, which is that around the world, 215 million Christians are being heavily persecuted. I'm not talking about, they can't get a job or they have a hard time, with people dissing them for their wearing a cross. I'm talking about people who are being raped or tortured or sold into slavery or simply murdered, sometimes en masse. That's a stunning data point. And to think that most of us in this country are ignoring it and not doing what we can about it is chilling. So what we've undertaken to do with a wonderful team of people, of which I'm proud to be a part, is put together, as I said, a coalition called the Save the Persecuted Christians Coalition. And it's modeled, if I could just give you a little background to this, it's modeled after a fantastically, in fact, miraculously successful campaign mounted about 50 years ago, initially by a handful of Jewish activists, as it happens, in Cleveland, Ohio, initially, that sought to do something about another persecuted population, a couple million Jews in what was then called the Soviet Union. And you may recall, what they did, Al Gore hadn't invented the Internet yet, so they didn't have social media, they didn't have the World Wide Web and all that. The religious broadcasting wasn't much of a factor then, and they faced, as it happens, a very hostile U.S. government which wanted to embrace and prop up the Soviet Union, much as we're talking about with some of these bad actors in Iran and North Korea today. They had a policy under Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon and Jerry Ford called détente. So far from wanting to hold the Soviets accountable for persecuting Jews, the leadership of the United States government was saying, no, we're not interested in that. Well, fortunately, this thing caught fire, and it started with signs being put up outside of synagogues and some churches across America, and it turned into a real political movement. And a guy that I wound up working for, interestingly enough, a United States Senator from Washington State by the name of Henry Scoop Jackson, took that movement, took that political force, and did something that was stunningly important. He attached a piece of legislation to the Trade Act saying the Soviet Union could not get what it wanted and turned out desperately needed, something known as most favored nation status, unless they let the Jews and anybody else who wanted to get out go. And of course, they wouldn't do that, and they didn't get most favored nation status, and with it, they didn't get a whole host of other financial benefits that they desperately needed. So when another guy I had the privilege of working for, as you heard earlier, Ronald Reagan came along, and he didn't want to prop up the Soviet Union. You may remember, he said, we win, they lose, was his strategy. He wanted to take them down. Well, he was able to use economic warfare to do just that. So the bottom line is this, as a friend of mine said, you're telling me that a couple of Jews with signs brought down an empire? Well, that's exactly what happened. And there was a lot of details and a lot of other actors, of course, but it mattered that those signs went up because it said something about America. It said something about the people here who cared about those people over there. And it turned into something that actually freed not just a couple of million Jews in the Soviet Union, but hundreds of millions of other people who had been enslaved by those guys from, the German border all the way to the Pacific. And the point is, I believe, with the Internet, with religious broadcasting like you guys do, with a friendly administration running the country who's powerfully convicted about Christians and wants to stop the persecution, we've got a chance to do something at least as miraculous for Christians who are currently suffering at the hands of the Kim Jong-uns and the Chinese and frankly, Hindu nationalists, as well as a whole bunch of jihadists around the world. And that would be to stop the persecutors from doing it. So in addition to the great work that people like Open Doors do to help, alleviate the suffering of Christians, we think there's a space and a need for a campaign like this, starting with banners. And by the way, if people want to get one free for their own church or synagogue or other house of worship, go to SaveThePersecutedChristians.org. We'll send you one with some information about why this is so important and other ways in which you can help. And I'm very grateful to you for allowing me to talk about that, because I think it's as important as anything we do at the moment to try to save the persecuted Christians around the world.
So again, give us a website.
SaveThePersecutedChristians.org.
.org. Okay. Very good. Well, folks, our phone line today is open, 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829, as we're talking about world affairs today. We've certainly spent a great deal of time here on the so-called Iran deal, the issues going on with Iran right now, and the breaking news from the Israel's prime minister yesterday. We've taken a look here at Syria. We're taking a look at North and South Korea. Phone number 800-733-9829. Let me ask you this as we're waiting for the opening calls to come in here, and that is, I know another area of certainly not only world affairs but national security at stake. I know you've got some grave concern regarding, and I know we could do a full program on just this topic alone, but what's being called civilization jihad right here in the United States, the threat of Islam, especially as we see it making its way. We see these Muslim advocacy days that are taking place in our nation's capital and in state government capitals. We see a record number of those espousing Islam running for office. Just share a moment, if you would, about your concerns regarding civilization jihad.
Thank you. Let me just say right up front, there are, I believe, Muslims, including, I think, large numbers of them in this country, who love our country, who in many cases came here to get away from something that made their lives horrifically awful in their own homelands. Something I believe is described by its adherents as Sharia. Mm-hmm. And by Sharia, they don't just mean law, though that's part of it. It's actually a comprehensive political, legal, and military system that is supposed to govern all aspects of a faithful Muslim's life. As I say, those who don't embrace this, I think, are at least at the moment not a problem. Those who do, though, are convicted that they are called by God to impose Sharia on everybody else. And the civilization jihad is a particularly insidious form of this Sharia supremacist agenda, because it kind of is like submarines. It runs silent, runs deep. It's stealthy. It's subversive rather than the violent kind, like we saw, of course, on 9/11 and in numerous incidents since. What we don't understand, most of us, is that for over 50 years now, the vanguard of that Sharia supremacist movement worldwide is the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's here. And we've been watching increasingly, and we've got a dozen or more books on the subject. Again, securefreedom.org. People can download them for free, starting with an explanatory memorandum, which was a strategic plan of the Muslim Brotherhood for destroying as they put it, quote, destroying Western civilization from within by their hands, meaning ours, the unbelievers, the kuffars, the infidels, and the believers, so that Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions, unquote. That's right out of the strategic plan that was introduced into evidence in the largest terrorism financing trial in U.S. history by the federal government. So we don't know about what these guys are doing simply because we don't want to know. But it's a very real danger. And by the way, in Michigan, as we speak, there is a battle royale that has started because somebody had the temerity to point this threat out. The guy who's running for governor up there, and to associate with another guy who's running for governor up there, who happens to be a Muslim, and I believe is a Sharia adherent one, certainly has been associated with the Muslim Brotherhood personally and through his family for years. He's running for governor, too, and this has now turned into a major brawl about, is there such a thing as Sharia supremacism? Are we allowed to still talk about it in this country? And if so, can we talk about the threat that it poses to all of us because of this seditious, stealthy, subversive form that it's taking, as the Brotherhood calls it, civilization jihad?
Phone number 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. Judy is calling from Waukesha, Wisconsin. You're on the air, Judy.
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Gaffney. I have a very large concern that seems to keep coming into my heart, and that is that I see that there's a lot of danger if Mr. Trump goes across the sea to try to meet anybody over there. If they're really serious about some kind of peace, which I doubt, why don't they come here? Or at least will he be in a place where he'll be safe? Any words on that? I'll hang up and take my answer off the phone.
Thank you, Judy.
Well, Judy, I worry about that too. But honestly, I worry about that in this country as well. We have people here who make no secret of their desire to do him harm. You've got celebrities holding up what is made to look like his disembodied head, for example, or threatening, telling people they dream of blowing up the White House. So it's not uniquely a problem overseas. I'm pretty confident that steps are taken to protect the president when he travels, both here and internationally. But, determined people in places that it's easier to get at the president than it is here in Washington, are not to be underestimated. And I think there's simply no possibility, at least at this point, that Kim Jong-un is coming to the United States. And if he did, frankly, I'd like him to stand trial for war crimes. But he's likely to meet the president someplace else. I don't know whether it'll be South Korea, or apparently they're talking about one or two other places. But I think what we can do for the moment primarily is to pray for the safety of the President of the United States, and I'm sure you're doing that.
We're going to take a quick break. Ken, stay on the line. We'll pick up your call next, and others are number 800-733-9829. This is Crosstalk on VCY America. World Affairs and National Security, our topic today on Crosstalk. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewradio.com. Today, the liberals, the progressives, the socialists are wanting people groups to war with each other. People like Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama have tried to create class warfare as well as cultural warfare, or people groups waging war against one another. They've tried to say, look at the poor in America. This is a result of the injustice created by capitalism, when the exact opposite is true. A young black author by the name of Jason Riley has written a book called Please Stop Helping Us, subtitled How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. He points out that their liberal, progressive, socialist policies do more harm, such as minimum wage laws, affirmative action, and other such liberal policies that he says destroys the opportunities for young black Americans. This author has it right. He's calling on the socialists and the progressives to please stop helping them.
listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Frank Gaffney is our guest today on the program, the CEO of the Center for Security Policy. And securefreedom.org is one of the websites given today. Let's go right back to the phone lines. We have Ken calling in from Ashland. Ken, you're on the air.
I have a question for Frank on the site, or like for contributing to the site that he's involved with. And I'd have to get that again because I'm going on the road and I could not write it down. But how much, is there any administrative fees how much does the site, that goes to the persecuted Christians? That's what I'm asking.
Well, at the moment, we have simply been carrying the costs of putting these banners out to as many of these churches as possible. The coalition has, and so any revenue that comes in is going to simply pay for those outlays, but it's otherwise going to be applied to helping promote the efforts of both the people in the field where we can, and more to the point, helping pursue the persecutors, which I think is the unique value added of this effort. SaveThePersecutedChristians.org.
Right. Okay, SaveThePersecutedChristians.org.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much. God bless you and your work.
Thank you, Ken.
Jim also. Thank you.
Thanks for the call. Let's go to Arkansas, and caller, go ahead. You're on the air.
Good afternoon. Yesterday, Brannon House presented in his program the possibility of the United States suffering terrorism because of our enemies being in Venezuela. Could your guest please elaborate on the Venezuela connection?
That's another interesting country that's morphed into communism here as well. Any comments, Frank, in brief, that you can make pertaining to Venezuela and its threat, if any?
Yeah, we can't honestly imagine how desperate things have become in what was once one of the richest countries on the planet, at least in terms of its natural resources, much of which is still there, actually, but it's bankrupt. People, I was talking with somebody who's following this very closely today, and he says, if you can get water or electricity on an intermittent basis, you're a very lucky person in Venezuela today. Millions of people are fleeing it simply because they can't survive on what is now the average wage there, if you can believe this, $2 a month.
Wow.
And that's as a result of having just gotten a raise from the generous government of Venezuela. Anyway, it's a desperate state of affairs, and unfortunately it's being exacerbated and perpetuated by the Cubans and the Iranians and the Chinese and the Russians in our hemisphere, and it poses, I believe, a very grave danger to our friends and our interests, certainly, in the region, and ultimately to us as well. And just a further thought quickly, Mexico may be next. If a similar leftist to the ones that ran Venezuela into the ground, a fellow by the name of Lopez Obrador, comes to power there, we may have a Venezuela disaster on our doorstep.
Thank you for raising that issue here today. And folks, I am going to just tie up the lines because we only have 3 minutes left here. And you talked about Mexico, and Frank, we know that there is also trouble lurking at our own border right now, where we have this army of so-called refugees, or the individuals seeking refugee status here in the United States. Some severe tensions at the borders here in the U.S. And in our last couple minutes, if I could just have you address this matter as it relates to our own national security as well.
Well, no, you're so right. I mean, there's a problem with Mexico already. This is before Lopez Obrador gets in charge of it. It has enabled the migration crisis that we face by allowing people who they otherwise wouldn't let into Mexico to come through Mexico to get to the United States. They're very tough on their own border restrictions and their own immigration laws. In fact, it's a very, very high penalty that you pay if you try to illegally get into Mexico. But if you're coming to the United States, they're all in on it. They have essentially collaborated in a provocation for the purposes of further, I think, soiling the reputation of President Trump and otherwise making his life difficult. But it's compounded by what else is going on there, most of which doesn't get the attention it requires, which is things like narco trafficking and the smuggling in of not just, people for sex slavery and other things, but also terrorists, jihadists among them. That's what's also going on from the Mexican border, and this is why I think President Trump's absolutely right. We need a wall.
An actual physical barrier.
In places where that makes sense, absolutely.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yet we have the likes of the governor of the state of California working just as much as they can to work against the Trump administration. We see the whole aspect of the sanctuary cities, sanctuary states. We also have the granting of pardons to those who otherwise would fall under criminal convictions under immigration law. And we're really at quite a mess as it relates to this issue on immigration and where we go from here.
We do have our work cut out for us, and I'm grateful every day that not only is Donald Trump president of the United States, who I think actually understands these things, as opposed to, of course, Hillary Clinton, who was all in on open borders and on legalizing the illegal immigrants, but also that he's now pulled around in people like John Bolton and as we talked about earlier, Mike Pompeo, and key people are beginning to staff him at last, who will support him in getting done what he promised to do. I regret terribly that it didn't get done right out of the box, but some bad personnel choices were made, and we're now recovering from them, and hopefully the rest will be, Reagan-esque in terms of what Donald Trump can accomplish.
Well, Frank, we appreciate you carving out the time from a very busy schedule to join us on the program today.
So happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Frank Gaffney with us today. Again, folks, the website's given out on the broadcast today, securefreedom.org, securefreedom.org, centerforsecuritypolicy.org, and savethepersecutedchristians.org. Talking today about world affairs and national security. And friends, we do encourage you to stay in fervent prayer for our nation's leaders, be praying for our country, and certainly keep your eyes focused on the Lord in all the troubling situations that erupt all across this globe. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.